Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhinas Santu, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Sarvastaratu Durgani, Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu, Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amrutam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we start today on Sutra number 71. That's on page 174. Modante pitaro nrityanti devataha sanatha cha iyam bhur bhavati. The ancestors rejoice, gods dance in joy, and the Mother Earth finds a protector in the devotee. So we are seeing what happens when a person's heart is filled with that highest love for God. What are the kind of changes that occur within the person and in the environment around that person? So among the things that we have seen before, here is this one additional information that Narada gives. Modante pitaraha. Pitaraha, pitris means ancestors. But it also, when we use the word ancestors, it usually means those who are no longer with us. But the Sanskrit word pitaraha includes the elders. So it can mean the parents who may be still living, but also grandparents and great-grandparents who may not be there. Now, why do they rejoice? Well, one common sense answer is obvious. When there is someone in the family who has done exceptionally well in some field, it's natural that people will rejoice. Now, currently, those who are students, if you do well in your exams, then your parents are going to be happy that the investment that they have done in you has been used well. But in spiritual life, it has an even deeper significance. It is not only that the parents are happy, that in our family we have one enlightened being, but even the departed ancestors become happy. And the reason for this is that the scriptures say that when a person becomes enlightened, 7 generations before and 7 generations later, they get the benefit of this person's enlightenment. And that is why sometimes spiritual discipline or spiritual practice is seen as an individual initiative, that an initiative that a person does for himself or herself. It's not so much seen as doing any good to others. We can understand the good that is done to others through social work. That's clear, that's obvious. But that when I sit alone in my room, praying or meditating, or doing my own personal worship, it seems as if that is going to benefit only me. Now, this sutra makes it clear that's not true. Besides bringing joy to people around us, especially those who are our own, they derive a more tangible benefit. For one thing, Swami Brahmananda, a great disciple of Ramakrishna, used to say that if there is one person in the family who prays sincerely, who meditates regularly, the entire family gets the benefit of it. And so, irrespective of whether the rest of your family is interested in spiritual life or not, or your friends are interested in it or not, if you are serious about it, if you practice earnestly, you are not only benefiting yourself, but you are also benefiting others. Oftentimes we don't realize the power of company, just the influence. Just as we are being influenced by the environment around us, people, things, and so on, we are also influencing people around us. And so if we do something good, we are benefiting ourselves and we are benefiting others. If we do something bad, we are hurting ourselves and we are also hurting around us. So the distinction that we sometimes tend to make between the person and society is, it's not a very rigid barrier, it's a very porous border. What happens in the society affects individuals within that society. And what one person does affects those who are, at least those who are in the immediate vicinity of that person. And we notice that also from our own experience. If we are in the company of someone who is always calm, peaceful, contented, it feels good. First of all, it feels good to have a friend who is always calm and peaceful and happy. But that somehow seeps into our personality a little bit. If we are disturbed at any time and we are in the company of someone who is peaceful, it becomes easier to regain back our peace. And so being peaceful and calm and cheerful ourselves is also helping people around us. This is very infectious. All of our emotions are very infectious. You might remember in Ramayana, the story is well known to most of you. So here is the stepmother of Rama, Kaikeyi, and once her mind was poisoned, and then she was asked that her son should become a king, and if Rama, who was a stepson, if he becomes the king, then her own son, Bharata, will have no chance. And so she became upset and she wanted to demand that from her husband. And so we read in the Ramayana that she goes to a room which was specifically reserved for if you are angry or upset or grieving, one room was set aside for that. Now, of course, the kings have big palaces and they can afford to have maybe a room set aside for every emotion. But the important point is this. There is a value, even as a concept, to have a place set aside if you are grieving or if you are angry, rather than spread those vibes of anger and grief all throughout the home and pollute the entire atmosphere. It just makes sense to just go in one room and keep it limited to that. The other advantage is the rest of the family knows that room is for anger room. So if anybody is angry, they'll be found there. So sometimes people are angry, but they hide it. And so others may not know. But if you are in that room, the rest of the family knows you are upset. And then they deal with you accordingly, suitable to in that state of mind. And we don't need to have a room for every kind of emotion, but at least recognize that these things do spread. And sometimes within a family, if there is some kind of a crisis within a family, if there is disagreements, difference of opinion, they will always be there. But if it manifests in some kind of even a verbal fight, if it kind of goes beyond a certain limit, but still, where are you going to go? You're part of the family. You can't leave and go anywhere. So you're still under the same roof. But if the situation becomes a little bit tense, you can kind of feel that tenseness within the house. And therefore, sometimes it can get so worse that sometimes people say, I'm just going to go out for a walk. Or some people just get into the car and just drive. anything to get away from that atmosphere. So when there is an enlightened being in the family, the atmosphere around that person is so powerful, is so infectious, that the rest of the family benefits from it. And that is why they rejoice. Sometimes it is one of the things they often tell in the monasteries. If someone chooses to take up monastic life, and so one of the things that they say is, well, by taking this life and striving to attain the highest, you are not doing good not only to yourself, but your 7 generations above and 7 generations below will get the benefit. And this has an advantage, to know that this is not something just for me. It's not a selfish activity. Meditating is not a selfish activity. So that's why Modante Pitaraha, the ancestors rejoice. Gods dance in joy. Now, why would gods dance in joy? Gods dance in joy because, I mean, who are these gods? That's the word God is problematic. So the Sanskrit word is Devata. It comes from the root, which literally means to shine. And so literally translated, Deva would mean the shining ones. It's unfortunate that it gets translated into English as God, and then the word God already has a specific theological meaning in Abrahamic traditions. And so that God, and then these shining ones, because they are translated, they use the same word God, then that sets up this whole debate about monotheism and polytheism, and there are many gods versus one God. This is the translation is a big issue there. So shining ones, who are the shining ones? There are many different ways that shining ones can be described. One way is people who are exceptionally good, who have acquired a lot of merit. In Sanskrit, the word for merit is punya. Do a lot of good karma with the desire to reap the results of that karma. We know if you do some good action, you will be rewarded for it. And that becomes an incentive to do good things, the desire to get the reward. So people who do a lot of good work, they get rewarded in some way. And among the great rewards that such people can get is that they go to a good place. And a generic name for that good place is heaven. And people who dwell there, if these bodies are not so shining, those bodies are much more shining. So the dwellers of heaven are called devatas. But among them again, among the citizens of that celestial world, there may be some who may be given some special duties. Now, when you have a group of people, if there is a community, there is a community in the celestial world, a lot of things that need to be done there. And so you need some people to do some administrative jobs. And so how the Vedas tried to conceptualize these other subtler worlds was the benefits that we get from the natural forces, from rain, water, air, fire, all these natural forces, because the Vedic sages saw all of these not just material events, but they saw it as an expression of life. They saw it as living. The personification of nature, that's what is behind the Devata thing. So they saw that behind all these big natural forces like rain and so on, there was some conscious force which was guiding the natural activities. And so they gave specific names to them. So in the Vedas we read about Indra, Varuna, and so on. Now that seems to be the name of a god, but it's not so much a name as a position. So someone who's in charge of the waters and the air and so on. And so these positions in the celestial world were filled by people who go to heaven and people who are exceptionally qualified for a certain job. So someone may be an Indra for some time, and then after that person has to be reborn again, someone else becomes an Indra. So this Devata, the word Devata in Sanskrit, has got these layers of meaning. And just calling it gods kind of flattens up the whole thing, doesn't give the full the picture. It's enough for our purpose to just to recognize by Devatas means the dwellers of other worlds, the subtler worlds, the celestial worlds. Now they rejoice because an enlightened being becomes an inspiration. That these Devatas, those who are in the celestial world, recognize that they have attained to those worlds, but they are smart enough to recognize also that the stay in that higher world is not permanent. The Gita says, A Brahma Bhuvana Lokaha Punaravartino Arjuna. No matter how high the celestial world is, they are all temporary. At some point or the other, your stay there is going to come to an end, and you have to come back to in this karma cycle once again. And so those dwellers in the celestial world, when they see one being has attained that highest love and become enlightened, become free from this cycle of this samsara, they rejoice and say, yes, next time I am going to be born again, I'm going to be smarter. I realized after coming to the celestial world, grace as it is, not the best. There is something higher than this. So even the Devatas find inspiration. Now, that is what is meant by saying, Nrityanti Devataha. The Mother Earth finds a protector in the devotee. The Mother Earth, again, as I was saying, is personifying everything that we see as material. So the earth itself is seen as a mother. Just as a mother nourishes her children, it's the earth that provides us with water, air, and everything that is needed for our physical sustenance. The Mother Earth rejoices because an enlightened being is one who does what is right, what is good. All that we see today about the need to protect the environment, to take care of the planet on which we live. It's the spiritual insight that provides a great motivating force of why we should take care of the planet. I mean, there is a very utilitarian view as well. Well, we should take care of this planet because this is where our children and grandchildren are going to live. And if we want to leave behind a good world, a safe world for our children and grandchildren, we should work for it. And that's a good motivation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But there is even a greater or a more powerful way of looking at this whole need to protect the earth, to take care of the earth, to take care of the resources on the planet by looking at it from a spiritual standpoint. So when a person becomes enlightened, that person sees the presence of the divine not only in the people around, but also in every bit of nature. In the Upanishad, it is said, the Taittiriya Upanishad, it says, Tat srishtva tadeva anupravishata. Having projected this universe, the highest being entered into every bit of it. So an enlightened being sees the presence of God not only in other human beings or other living beings, but in every bit of every material particle, which we might dismiss as just material. The enlightened being sees it as just brimming with the presence of God. And when you have devotion to God, and when you see everything filled with God, you can never hurt anyone. You can never destroy anything. In fact, your natural instinct will be to preserve, to protect, to take care. And that is why the Mother Earth finds a protector in the devotee. Sutra 72. Nasti teshu jati vidya rupa kula dhana kriyadi bhedaha. In them, that is the devotees who have attained the highest love for God, Such distinctions as caste, learning, beauty, family background, wealth, profession, and so on are never present. Now, it's human nature to make categories, to divide. However much we might like to say, oh, we are all one, we are all one big family, it's a very nice sentiment. And yet, you open your eyes and you look around, and yes, of course, we see human beings, but we don't just see human beings. We somehow, I think it's just the conditioning of the mind, we make distinction. We make distinction based on gender, we make distinction based on, well, any number of things. And it's not to deny that there are differences. And one might say, well, if there are differences, then why not acknowledge them? And mind, whenever we see, the mind sees that there are things that are different, it's the way the mind is, it just starts classifying. Oh, this group is, you give a name to it, and this group is different, and this group. And we therefore make distinction based on all of these things, on caste, learning, beauty, family, and of course everything is not mentioned. There is class, race, color, there are any number of ways we make that distinction. Now, that distinction does not exist in the mind of a person whose heart is filled with that highest love for God. We are not just talking about the beginners in the path. We have seen that this section deals with people who have reached that highest love, called the Parabhakti, the highest form of devotion. Now, what it's meant is not that these people become blind and they are not able to see things that are different, but those differences don't matter anymore. They see, they have a kind of an X-ray vision which cuts through all these differences which appear very superficial, and they see the core of every being to be the same one divine present there. And that's why the differences don't matter. Sometimes you may know that there used to be these small cookies when in my childhood I remember seeing, and many of you must, well, all of us have been children once, so I'm sure many of you must have seen, there used to be these cookies with cut in different shapes, different animal shapes, and there used to be an elephant and tiger and cat and dog and so on. But the material was same. It was just the same cookie. It was shaped in a different way. And then sometimes, as children, just if you like elephant, then you say, I want that elephant, I don't want this, and you'll kind of fight over it. But then when you're grown up, you just kind of just smile at it. Not that you are not able to see the different shapes of those cookies, but you know that, well, the essence of it, the substance is the same. Now that is what happens to a person of God. It's not as if we need a very high state of enlightenment to even intellectually understand how superficial the differences are. That's why even the differences that we make between people because of color and caste and class and all those, race and so on, and we know that one way we can say is the value just the blood that comes out is the same color in everyone. So there are ways of understanding that things are not as different as they seem, but certain differences might be easy to overlook, but certain other differences may be difficult to overlook to certain people. And if a lot of this is related to self-identity, and that is, if a certain type of identity is very important to me, then I will not be able to overlook differences based on that identity outside. Now, for instance, religious differences. Now, if my identity as belonging to a certain religion is so dominant in my life that when I look around, whether I like it or not, this thing will remain uppermost in my mind. I meet someone, I meet a friend And if I'm very much conscious of my religious identity, of belonging to a specific religion, then whenever I meet someone, I might, in my mind, although I may not speak about it openly, I might like, what religion does this person belong to? Or if you're big into sports, and you say, well, I'm a Sox fan, I'm a Red Sox fan, then when you go to some baseball game, you will say, well, how many of my fellow fans are here? And which are the people cheering for the other team? Same with politics. Again, if you are identified with one political party, then you would become more conscious of the political affiliations of the people you come in contact with. So the differences that we notice outside are the differences that are important in our own lives. And there are certain things we may not care. For instance, there are people who don't see themselves as religious. If they don't see themselves as religious, then religious differences outside won't matter to them. So this is important to remember, that what I see outside is very directly related to how I see my own self. And one who has attained that highest love for God, who sees within oneself just the presence of the divine, sees the presence of the divine in the heart of everyone. And therefore, none of these other distinctions matter. So one of the ways to understand ourselves is to see how we look at the world, how we understand the world. So depending on what our priorities are with regard to the world, we will know what our priorities are with regard to our own identity. So the two are very related. Sometimes we might think that, oh, what I am is a very personal something, and that has nothing to do with my social self. Sometimes, part of the time, if one is very determined, one might be able to keep one's social self separate from one's personal self. But very few people can manage to be so alert all the time. And therefore, there will be times in our life when we are not very alert, when we are not very vigilant, then the inner self will manifest outwardly in the way we speak, in the way we think. Well, the way we think, again, no one's really going to know what's going on in our heads. But a lot of times, if you're not careful, if you're not alert, if there is that filter, for whatever reason, is absent, then you are going to say what you think, or you're going to do what you want to do, and then you'll realize, oh, I shouldn't have done this because I thought only I knew that I'm capable of saying this or doing this. So unconsciously, we do reveal ourselves to people around us all the time. Of course, there is much talk nowadays about privacy issues, how much data is we are giving away, and is data mining is being done by social media and many other things. And it is definitely a matter of concern. But a lot of our data is already being broadcast by just who we are. As we move in the world, carrying out our duties and responsibilities, meeting people, we are continually telling the world who we are. Even though, I mean, of course, if you sign up a form and give all the details, that's serious enough. But I'm just saying, just through the way we talk and deal with people, the way we behave, the way we treat other people, the way we do our work, we are already letting out a lot of data. The only saving factor, if you like, is most people can't read that data. But any sufficiently self-aware person who is a careful observer will be able to know. By just looking at a person, spending some time with a person, you know exactly. There are, I think it's called graphology. Sometimes even in our writing,
Nowadays, very few people write. Of course, if you're using a keyboard, then it becomes a little bit difficult. But in the good old days, people used to write, use a pen and paper. And so it was a science in itself of how you dot your I's and how you cross your T's and what kind of a loop you make when you write a G or a Y. And a lot of people could deduce some personality traits even through our handwriting. I mention all this to show that there are ways in which we are already announcing who we are, and any careful person can know. And so that the enlightened being, because the enlightened being sees nothing but God everywhere, that enlightened being doesn't need any filter, because what is inside comes outside. For the rest of us, when we are trying on a path to reforming ourselves, we know that there are positive, good things within our heart, but we are also aware of the weaknesses in our heart. And this is not to say being transparent doesn't mean just going and announcing to the world your weaknesses. That's not necessary, and in fact, it can be counterproductive. But we know where we lack, what our weaknesses are. And so long as we are sincerely, consciously trying to overcome our weaknesses, that's great. So we don't have to, just for the sake of transparency, just go and announce what our faults are. We don't have to do that. There's problems enough in life. Don't want to increase them. But so it's good to have some filter of what is appropriate given in a certain situation or a place. But that kind of a filter is not needed for an enlightened being whose life becomes an open book. And that's what they say. The ideal to strive for is that we should make our life such a way, try to lead our life in such a way, or take it to a point where we don't have to hide our diary. That's what they say. So I read it some years ago that if we consciously try to live a life where we will not have to hide our diary. And that's what people say about my life being an open book. I mean, that's a phrase people use, but very few lives people would want it to be an open book, because it may not always be a very pretty book. But one who is enlightened, that person has no need to hide or cover anything, because that person sees the divine everywhere and all these superficial distinctions. Because it is these distinctions that are at the root of a lot of the problems in life, in society and communities. Because when there are differences, I'm going to like one, I'm going to dislike something else. If I'm going to have certain favorites, and I'm going to hate certain thing. But if everything I see is just one, then there is nothing to hate, there is nothing to love, it's just one. So that's the idea. So just to summarize, oneness does not mean that you don't see the differences. Oneness means that you see the differences, but the differences don't matter. That you see a oneness at a deeper level, and the external differences don't matter at all. And that's explained in the next sutra, 73. Yatas tadiyaha. Distinctions do not exist because they are God's very own. You will see that, that's the closest we can come to understanding this ideal is in the ideal of motherhood. At a human level, a mother has children, and the children may be very different. We know that siblings can be very different from one another. And in a mother's eyes, they're all my babies. And so a mother sees the differences, recognizes the strengths and weaknesses of every one of her children, but deep down she knows they are my children. And so because they are my children, these other distinctions, which may be big deal to others, but to a mother's heart, they don't matter. What really matters is they are my children. And so therefore God is sometimes seen as our divine father, a divine mother. And because God has that divine motherhood, in the eyes of God, no one is high, no one is low. So here there's one incident I will mention. I read it a few years ago. President Carter, he was the president of the country in the 70s. So this incident occurred that time. So after his inauguration, and this was mentioned, I think, in one of Carter's own books or a talk he gave. I don't remember where I read this. So after his inauguration, when the first family was formally entering into the White House, and so his mom, what was the name? Rosalind Carter? Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's Rosalind Carter, I think. No? It doesn't matter. His mother. So Carter narrated this incident years later. So the first family enters into the White House, and his mom was behind. And he said, there was a lot of these journalists and reporters, with cameras and everything, and they were wanting to ask questions, but he said, I just walked without answering anything, just entered. But his mother, he said she was very approachable and social, and so she stopped by. And so one of the reporters asked her, aren't you proud of your son now? And then she turns back, and then she asked the reporter, which son? And then President Carter said he was so proud of his mother for saying that, because it would have seemed, well, obviously, your son is now the president of the country. So when the reporter said, aren't you proud of your son? And the mother, she didn't assume, well, just because one son is the president, why should I assume that that's the only son I can be proud of? Well, I don't know what she thought in her mind, but to the question, aren't you proud of your son? Rather than giving the obvious answer, she just said, which son? Now that's what I meant. To a mother's heart, one son may be the president, another son may be something which we might say, well, that's an ordinary thing to do. But for a mother, they are both my children. And God is our mother. So, Holy Mother Sharada Devi once said that in the path of spiritual life, no one should feel abandoned. No one should feel lonely. And she said, if at any time you feel that I have no one, always remember you have the mother. And she was that great, the heart filled with that motherhood. She saw everyone as her children. And so that is the idea here. Because distinctions do not exist because they are God's very own. And that just like children are mother's very own, every one of us is special. None of us need feel that I'm a failure or I'm an insignificant. Or we compare ourselves to others and sometimes either feel very egoistic or we just feel, well, I'm a nobody. And in the path of spiritual life, none of us need feel that we are a nobody. Every one of us is special. Every one of us is unique in the eyes of God. That's the kind of insight that can come to us when our heart is filled with the love for God. So we'll stop here today. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions, feel free to share.
Swamiji, you mentioned that enlightened person, 7 generations past and future. Mm-hmm. So normally what I feel like we have seen, most of the monks are the ones who have enlightened. What does it mean by future generations? They don't have normally families.
Well, then in that case, there's only the previous 7 generations. But it's not only the monastics who realize God. Anyone can realize God. In fact, a great many of our saints, even many of the Vedic sages, they were not monastics. And so it's not true that everyone has a right for that highest enlightenment. And it's completely, there is this one question that M, the recorder of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, he had that a little bit of a regret in his heart that he had not become a monastic, that he was a householder, he hadn't become a monastic. And so he asked that question to Ramakrishna, and that is, what is it that determines who becomes a monastic and who does not become a monastic? And Ramakrishna's answer is very important. And he said, it's the will of God. He did not say, oh, if you have a greater renunciation, greater detachment, then you'll be monastic. If you don't have enough, then you won't. That's not true. So it's not about that monastics are something very special as opposed to non-monastics. And Ramakrishna's answer was, it's the will of God. So wherever we are, in wherever God has placed us, we have the potential to realize the highest. Just because one has become a monastic does not automatically guarantee that that person is going to be enlightened. And just because someone is not a monastic doesn't mean that, well, no hope. It doesn't work that way. Now, to kind of put a little bit of a nuance into it, we are talking about an external way of life, whether taking a monastic way of life or a non-monastic way of life. But internally, if I want to become enlightened, I will have to become a monastic internally. And that internally, there is a verse in the Gita, Neyasa nitya sannyasi, yo na dveshti na kangshati. Nitya sannyasi, Krishna says that the person can be an eternal monastic. Yo na dveshti, from whose heart all hatred has gone. Na kangshati, all ambition and desire has gone. And for that, one doesn't have to be a monastic. So if I'm able to eliminate hatred from my heart, if I'm able to eliminate all expectations from anyone from my heart, then that is what freedom is. And then that person, Krishna says, the nitya sannyasi, you are an eternal sannyasi. So yes, if you want to use the word monastic, then a monastic frame of mind is necessary, irrespective of externally what society regards us as. I think that is very important. I mean, sometimes people have this an effort, which I feel is oftentimes a futile debate between science versus religion, or faith against reason. I don't think that's very helpful. But we say, what is it that is the strength of a science, if you say? And I would call that a scientific temper. There's a certain frame of mind to study, to analyze. Now that is important. And I think even to be a religious person, that kind of a scientific temper, that not to accept anything unless and until it satisfies my reason, unless and until you know that this has been validated, unless and until you know that this is an experience that can be replicated. And I think that's great. So a scientific frame of mind is important in religion, just as the religious frame of mind, which says don't reject something just because it doesn't fit into my assumptions. That is what faith really is. So rather than dismissing faith as something just kind of a blind acceptance of something, I think faith is a very positive something. What faith does is it doesn't reject something just because it is not immediately obvious to me, or something that is not immediately demonstrable, but to accept the possibility unless and until that possibility can be completely eliminated. So I think both science and religion have a lot to contribute to one another, the way the two terms science and religion are used today. And that is what Swami Vivekananda wanted, that going forward, the future would be that the best of the scientific temper, the scientific mind, and the best of the religious mind, if they can come together, that will be the ideal person of the future. That's the idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maharaj, in the sloka 72 and 73,
Yeah.
The nasti tesu jati vidya rupa koladhana and yatas tadya, it was seen so easily in Sri Ramakrishna. I thought when I read this.
Yep, absolutely. That's why Sri Ramakrishna used to say that devotees of God have no caste. So all the distinctions that we tend to make in social life, once a devotee itself becomes a kind of a devotee community, then none of these differences matter. And it's good to have at least a small community in which one is able to overlook or go beyond the distinctions. And if we can create such a small community where these differences don't matter, then there is some hope. Now all that we need to do then is to expand this circle, not to limit it only to say my community. And then again there is a difference, my community and these outsiders.
Yeah.
So when that distinction, so this thing has to broaden more and more. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Swamiji, you mentioned about heaven. Actually, what is heaven? I'm asking because we see that whatever karma we do, we get the fruit here in this birth or the next birth or sometime here. Then what is the utility of heaven or hell?
Well, next birth doesn't mean birth only on this planet. Even when you go to heaven, you have to be born in heaven. I mean, when we say we go to heaven, think about it just from the logistics point of view. Where will we drop? I mean, like, this is heaven. It's like going to be dropped from the sky or something. I mean, how did we come on this planet? We didn't drop from the sky. We were born to parents, right? So we will be born in heaven. So there will be parents there as well. So that is also rebirth. So rebirth, don't think rebirth means only this little earth. Birth simply means acquiring a body. That is what birth is. And that body can be acquired anywhere. Even to enjoy the joys of heaven or to suffer the pains of hell, we still need a body. So people will be born in hell or born in heaven. So rebirth, that is what rebirth is. So understood in this sense, heaven becomes just one of the many possibilities in which body can be taken.
Swamiji, I wanted to say that it's actually funny that on the one hand, when we look at the world, as well as internally in our own minds, there seems to be so much variety, so much difference. But then when you look a little bit deeper, it seems like there are not so many differences. So, for example, if you look internally within one's own mind, you'll find some desires, some fears, some anger or hatred. And typically that's the way we live the whole life, and then one way we die. And if you look even externally, there are about like 105 elements in the periodic table, that constitute the entire, universe that we know of. And, you look at people around you, the details we don't know, but typically we have an idea that, if there are a few number of components that they have in their personalities, and that's pretty much it. But the funny thing is that it's so exciting, nevertheless, that we get caught into.
That's why it's ignorance. It's a pretty monotonous thing, but we still find ways to find excitement in it. And if it becomes monotonous, we are upset. So we try to find ways to get over that monotony. In fact, it's good that you brought that up, because one of the challenges, I mean, I could use the word challenge, I think, in spiritual life, is to accept the monotony. By accepting monotony, I mean, if all of my life is focused on using time and energy to find something exciting to do, then I'm never going to realize God. So first thing is, you kind of look at all this, think about all this, and then just as the conclusion that you came to, well, you just repeat it. It's like, what was that movie? Groundhog Day, remember? Yeah, it's just the same story. I mean, actually think about, if you just decide you have, say, a long weekend, and then you decide, I'm going to, and you're a movie buff, and you decide, I'm going to watch as many movies as possible. And you got some streaming, or you have got lots of DVDs or whatever. And then you say, just 3 days, you just sit in one place and just watch one after another, and different genres also if you want. And then after some time, you're going to get bored. And after some time, if we are smart enough, you're going to see, no matter how different each movie is from the other, if you just see it one after the other for a long time, you're going to say, it's not that much different. It's, everything has some drama, some emotion, some this, etc. And then probably you would never want to see any movie again. So getting over this monotony is very helpful in spiritual life, because then we have a much greater freedom to turn inside and look at what the obstacle in our wanting to turn inside are the things that excite us outside. And when you find everything, well, no big deal, it's all monotonous, and then you look inside. And the beauty is that the infinite variety is not really the word, but what the idea I want to convey is that the moment you try to think of God in whichever form that you are intent to, you will begin to see a lot more excitement there. And then all the other excitement outside becomes like a very pale shadow of it. But in order to even intuit that inner exciting adventure in the heart, one must be able to withdraw from that external thing. And that withdrawal becomes possible if you notice the monotony outside. In the beginning, for instance, think about it this way. As a prayer or a worship or meditation, now oftentimes the guru gives a mantra and you have an ishta. And it might seem like, well, the same mantra to be chanted every day, like there's no variety. What if I get bored with this mantra? Can I not get some other mantra? What if I get bored of thinking of my ishta? Again, that's what the mind will do. It's like, I want variety. But then once you've gotten used to this kind of apparent monotony of the thing, you just hold on to it. And what you discover is that even though you're chanting the same mantra, the same sound of the mantra, you're only visualizing your ishta, you then begin to see how exciting that whole effort is. You begin to see the joy that you get from that practice is incomparable, much more than any of the joy that you may have got anywhere else. Once that, when you get that inner depth of meditation you experience, that joy is much superior to everything. So yes, so in one sense, recognizing the monotony outside is a good step for our interior life. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here today, and when we meet next time, we'll begin with Sutra 74. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva
pranamami muhurmuhu. On Sunday, satsang, our subject will be improve, change, pray. Next Wednesday, we'll continue with this study. And on Saturday and Tuesday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. So let's conclude with a prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.